Hi everyone. So today we have a very special guest. I think this is the first time we're meeting online and anywhere. So Lara, right? How are you?
Yes, hello. I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you just now that I'm busy with my licensure exam. So I'm currently studying for my architecture's license. So I've been busy learning everything and like trying to capture all of the content for like the building codes and stuff like that. So yeah, for those who do not know who you are, I think they'll be interested to know where you're from, what you're doing right now as an architecture designer, and anything about yourself. Yeah, go away.
Sure. So, hello again. My name is Lara Abou Znad. I am an architect from Beirut. So, now on to me and a little bit of my story. I'm Beirut born and raised. I grew up in an urban environment. I would say I had a typical childhood of the 2000s. I was born in the 1997. So, I completed my Bachelor of Architecture at the Lebanese American University. Not so long ago, actually. And I immediately began working at Arch. It's a startup company made of 4 designers. We work together as a team of passionate architects and designers. And I believe that having like a visual stimulus of your environment while walking around is very important. This is how it got me to begin my career as an architect. So, for example, if I'm walking down the street and I want to see an eclectic mix of buildings that I find very exciting, I would be disappointed to see rows of uniform built houses, boring, dull, gray houses. And I think that was a problem. So I began my career to like try to explore the so many kinds of spaces that one needs nowadays. And I think that good architecture is one that really touches all our senses, not just one of them. So for me, it's about creating places rather than just spaces. That's basically it.
Yeah. So how long have you been already working in the industry so far?
You know that working in Lebanon is pretty hard, but it's very interesting because Lebanon presents one of the very interesting laboratories, if I may say, of the different tendencies and movements and learnings, especially in the past century, beginning with the modernism, postmodernism, the assimilation of both, and the current trends today that are very different, present at the Lebanese, if you want, academic and practical realms in a very fertile manner. The question of meaning, of content, of context, of tradition, of place, and all of these things have all played part in the development of architecture in Lebanon. We had good architects. I'm in a tiny country that is um, unnoticed sometimes for many other countries, but we really had the, if you want, opportunity to know about many important architects around the world and sometimes be as important as they are. So technically, working as a designer in Lebanon is interestingly challenging. First of all, we can see that there are so many different cultures and religions. We have 18 different religions in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, so many events have took place in such a small amount of time. We had over past the civil war and very recently the Beirut August 4 explosion, which was very, very, very
Mm.
hard on each and every one of us. And after this explosion, honestly, we had a lot of opportunities to rethink about how should we rebuild the city and the city surroundings, and it was really challenging to know which style should we abide by and what should we do about that. The new houses would increasingly fail to respect the fundamental traditions of design and all of these things. And the house, as an integral part of the Lebanese landscape, it's known the Lebanese traditional house. with its natural environment. We kind of lost that after Beirut explosion and after wanting to really go for the modern kind of works and the postmodernism style of architecture. So now we know less about the local architecture traditions formed over thousands of years, with starting by the Phoenicians, going on to the Ottoman Empire, and then the French Mandate. So it's really a rich culture of so many ups and downs. And this is what makes the working in Lebanon very, very hard and very challenging. So yeah.
Yeah, I just remembered what happened in Lebanon, and it's quite. I think it's a good opportunity for architects to take a stand. Like, do we preserve what we have and make it the same, or do we like adapt it, like make it something still a bit modern, but you still remember the essence, like the finishing, like the materials and even the patterns, for example, if there's any motifs in your culture. So yeah, it's architects, we are also forced to take a stand in a sense. So how do you feel about heritage, your heritage, and in the way that's practiced right now in your country, and how you think you can actually improve it, or maybe is any issues about it?
Yeah. Technically, what's really interesting about that story is that Beirut explosion occurred in next to one of the oldest kind of places in Lebanon, which had most of the traditional buildings. So it was the closest to it, and this whole street full of traditional buildings and full of traditional housing and the arches and all of these features was fully destroyed. So it
Mm.
was very strong, if you want, loss of heritage when this happened, and we barely had the structures only standing alone in dust and ashes. So we had really hard time knowing if we should actually rebuild those houses in their traditional manners using literally limestone and wood as structures like before, or if we should actually try to kind of move on to the new kind of social need that is we really thought about, for example, architecture of emergency and how we can really put people back together in their homes in the fastest manner, because we had like 300,000 families without homes. So it was a really big challenge to know if we really had the time to rebuild these traditional houses the way they were, which is very hard, taking into consideration the studies of renovation and all of these things, or to try to create an adaptable kind of architecture of emergency to like put people back in and try to make them fine again, because it was a kind of disaster what happened. So the resplendent traditional houses that first flourished in Lebanon, the central hall house, the traditional courtyard house, all of these things that were made up of a single block topped with pyramidal pitched roofs that were in red, like we all know, and the arcades, the galleries, all of these things where sun can actually penetrate, where everything was vernacularly sustainable before, was very hard to remake now. And the main impact of preservation of the classical Lebanese residences actually has been hard. I personally think that we should raise awareness among the white public in Lebanon to actually try to save these houses that remain in literally in every kind of land on Lebanon. You can see or track a Lebanese traditional house. But sadly, I think it's hard to rebuild all the houses the same way. Um, I think it's impossible.
I think there's also a lot of different there's some technologies available to actually help some of the things that can actually be restored, right? Like identity, it may not be the actual like exact one-to-one replica of something, but at least it's an essence that we can actually try our best as architects to restore. uh,
Mhm.
that's one, maybe like the elements, certain elements that can actually be adapted, like the patterns, if there's any motif and patterns, if there's any uh the way the layout, right? Like how your house is still there, right? It still have that same sort of like uh spatial layout. and you don't want to actually kind of stray away from the very common and maybe more comfortable way of living in a dwelling. You not introduce like new types of housing that is more resilient, but sort of basically balancing the resilience design versus the cultural identity as a house for a person staying in the country. Yeah, I just want to actually understand like so so your involvement in this restoration, is it how is it like?
All right. So first of all, it started off while I was still a student.
Mm,
We were asked to kind of give our opinions on how should we reconstruct the post-war, the post-civil war that occurred in 1975 till 1990. It left behind so many destroyed areas up until today that weren't actually taken care of until nowadays. So I was asked to give my opinion on how should these buildings be rebuilt and
mm,
restructured to have a better living. But I had many challenges in that realm because once you begin thinking about the architectural style in Lebanon, you begin to notice that there are so many different styles, but one of the styles is, for example, the postmodernist style. Another style is, for example, the style of the early modernists of the for example, 20s or the 1930s. Nowadays, if you literally want to design a building, you would be lost into which style should the building follow. It's very hard to replicate old buildings, even with their small motifs or even with their small, if you want, um, details. But that's just because you cannot imagine a new modern house that has only one artifact or only one, if you want, repetition of or replica of a motif of an old house, because you would feel that it doesn't have the same value. So it would be more of a symbolism kind of work, which I personally try to avoid in my
mm,
personal work. I try to avoid symbolism and I try to avoid ornaments, if you want. This is something that I believe is not necessary to create an identity. And that was mainly the problem. It's a problem of identity. We fail to actually precise a specific architectural identity in the country due to the so many conflicted cultures and events that have been happening. So you see that every time a client wants to design a building, they take into consideration minor issues like, for example, the context, the surrounding. Sometimes we forget to take into consideration the history, the layers of history actually on that land that really matter into bringing back a memory, especially like the one of the civil war, which I call a collective memory for the whole Lebanese country. This is very important, like to get over this trauma of war, of explosions, of all that's been happening. You should really try to come up with a solution that would be beneficial for all the society as one, not the divided society as we have today. So it's really kind of hard to match all of these together. But what's interesting is that sometimes people do understand we have the freedom of expression in Lebanon. So as an architect, you can really go and like have your own thoughts and have your own kind of practice theories, and that would work. Actually, that would work if the client can listen to you or can understand what's behind this thought. And sometimes it's a problem of finance because the country situation. So some designers would rush to work instead of really taking into consideration everything that matters before actually executing a project. And this is a very important factor because the social political situation in Lebanon is failing to control the urban, if you want, development. So you would see different kinds of buildings in one street that wouldn't go along together, and then it would be normal in Beirut to see that. And this is kind of dangerous. We've been fighting hard to change that. We've done so many um, campaigns, social campaigns, digital campaigns, all of these things. but we're still at the beginning. We're still at the beginning of that.
So it sounds like it's a very extensive uh, discussion between all the different parties, right? And, like they actually consulted students like yourself. They consulted a lot of architects on the direction that architecture in Lebanon is going to be like, right? I think I'll just take one example for Singapore, because Singapore also there's a lot of different, like where I am in Singapore right now, we have a lot of influence as well previously for the architecture. Like I'm not sure if you know that we have like four national races, like the Chinese and the Malaysians and Indians and Eurasians. So all of us have also like the same, like initially in think like maybe before the 2000s and 1990s, like you also see very distinct architecture styles like the Chinese architecture, Malay architecture. So there's a lot of different styles. But I think moving towards 2000s, what we're seeing right now in Singapore is a lot of tropical architecture, because our climate, right, is very hot. Uh, it's either very hot or it's very cold, like raining, not snow. If you don't have snow at all, it's just basically just very hot or it's just very wet. So I think what we are realizing and we see in Singapore nowadays, the modern architecture, when we put it as Singapore architecture, that is quite commonly known now, is there's a lot of trees, a lot of nature, community spaces. Like for example, if we're talking about public housing, right,
Mhm.
projects, we do see a lot of integration of social facilities within the dwelling precinct itself, and that's a very careful planning with all the different parties involved, like the planning authorities and the architects, the residents to be. Uh, so that is what I define as architecture in Singapore right now. Like it's a uh, very sustainable, but it's sort of not really. It's getting there. Like it's going towards a sustainable direction. In the terms of social sustainability, environmental sustainability, like we're thinking about having all these technologies to like solar power, renewable resources. So all of these actually defines what Singapore is trying to do as architects. Yeah. So maybe you can take inspiration from like that, because we do also want to, for some projects, we also maintain that identity previously. That was maybe, for example, we try to reconvert a previous air base that was closed down. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of projects currently right now in Singapore that we are trying to readapt these spaces, but also not to lose the identity. For example, we want to create certain, the runway is actually there, like the airbase. So they actually
Mhm.
leave it as a road. So you can still see the layout from satellite view. Like this is gonna be the runway. It it is replaced by an actual vehicular road, right? And then they actually intend to put in new housing developments within the airbase itself. Like so that's like a conversion per se, but it's also not losing the idea that this used to be an airbase serving the military, and now it's actually housing people. And that's one way I see it, because it doesn't need to be an actual one-to-one, like what is it, like one-to-one replica of
Yeah.
something, right? It is more about the essence, like the feeling that you are in the space, and also knowing maybe that through certain like imagery that can be maybe for on the walls, like painting on the walls, or even like certain views, like vistas looking at certain things, like maybe if you see like a monument in the town nearby, that also could be a reminder. So it doesn't need to be the actual building itself, but it could be something that you feel and see around. And it doesn't need to be like an actual one-to-one design can that is still stuck in the past per se. Like what you're mentioning. Yeah. So I think the opportunity there is for you guys to actually see how to band together and to decide what is the architecture brand for Lebanon, Lebanon, right? Which is
Yeah.
quite interesting, and I hope that like, you guys actually uh, talk about it more, because I think by going out on your own and then seeing different directions, it will still be a conflict per se, right? Like what you mentioned, like some architects can choose to do something that is different from others, and then you'll still see like a non-coherence. And yeah, it is good or bad. One thing is good because you can actually try the different options, right? You can actually architect A can do something, and then you realize this is not what we do. This is not what Lebanese is about. And then maybe architect B can do something else, and then this is not what we are about. and then it's also a process of elimination per se, and that's how you actually like narrow down to like what we as a country want to do and how we want to be seen by the world. Like how do we design certain buildings? Yeah, and I would say it takes a long, it is a long process to actually figure out what architecture is in a country, like and like the brand per se. Yeah, so keep on going. I feel that it requires a lot of parties to be involved. That's
Yeah.
for sure. And yeah, especially in a developing country, like reeling from a certain national crisis, right? I think all the more it needs to be a cohesive effort. It means everyone has to be involved, not only the architects but also the residents and at all walks of life, and then different stages of uh, the population, maybe the elderly, the children who wants to see something different, maybe current working parents, So they all have different ideas of living, and like in the country, like at this state right now. So, but the good news is that at least there is an opportunity to collaborate, and yeah, I hope that it can be seen as a good way to improve and also go together as well towards a brighter future. Yeah,
Yeah.
so architects really play a big role in that, like shaping the environment that we are.
Of course. Of course, the issue is we need to be unified here in Lebanon.
Mm,
We need to be unified, first of all, to like refix, if you want,
mm,
everything that has been destroyed, everything that has been gone due to all the events. And it's that at the cultural level of the country, the crisis is more acute in societies where an identity crisis has resulted, as I previously mentioned. So it's by the accumulation of so many major events that were created, and in Beirut precisely, the three main notions that would actually make the better living, which are the social, political, the economic, and the cultural poles. These three notions were severely damaged by different, if you want, corrupted governments, which we are trying to fight against nowadays. It started back in 2019, and we're still trying, especially after Beirut explosion. So this is why it's easier nowadays, because at least everyone agrees that what's been happening is wrong. And even on an architectural level, like this affects architecture greatly when you begin to think of one goal, which is bringing back life to this city that can no longer breathe. So the idea of having social housing, the idea of having breathable structures, the idea of keeping what's old and renovating it in a subtle manner, the idea of trying to create spaces and breathable spaces for the public. We have now the notion of public versus private,
mm,
very importantly, by like the beginning of our thoughts, because this is important and we disregarded that. In the Arab world, it's very important to own a house, a family house. So that was mainly the idea of every Lebanese family up until we realized that this cannot work, because nowadays the urban fabric developed in a very fast manner. So it's almost impossible to like own a family house of 2 floors for each family. This is like, that was an old concept and it does not work anymore,
mm,
which also brings on the table the issue of not being able to build traditional houses anymore.
mm,
Handcrafted stone, this is very expensive, and even the structures and the amount of stone that we need to use. In the end, we cannot destroy our mountains. We have beautiful green mountains. We have snow. We have greenery. We have everything that one needs for a very nice looking view wherever you were in Lebanon. So I think that it would be very important nowadays to start thinking of the community, of how to bring back a positive collective memory, maybe the idea of the palimpsest, and how to actually really kind of keep all of these nostalgic moments in a way to develop them. And there's something I've always said, and it's that we should learn from the past, learn the lessons of the past, even in architecture and in heritage. But that doesn't mean that if we learn them, we should replicate them. Maybe we can take the features, the healthy features of them, the aesthetic features of them, and then try to create something that is as practical and as developed and progressively serving the community and the society, because we can no longer think of each individual alone. The issue became a social issue, and this is what we've been focusing on in our educational system as well. You always hear the terms social communities and architecture for society, collective memory. These are things that we've been using for the past 2 years in Lebanon.
You mentioned quite a few things about at least how do we move forward as a country, because basically, like I think you mentioned quite interesting thing about having to preserve the views, right? The greenery, that's the main priority. So it's like an urban planning stage, right? When you start to think about how do we still keep like the layout of the roads and make sure that there's no we preserve the greenery around, the views are there. So actually it still keeps that memory, like what we have currently, and it's beautiful, right? And then secondly, you mentioned about the like talking to the community about how the extent of like how the design of the house is going to be like, because like a two-story house is no longer feasible and like it's too expensive, right? So that
Yes.
also on the one hand provides like the opportunity to redefine housing. It may be a smaller space per se, but it's still livable, and maybe it could be even better as
Mhm.
compared to last time. So that's where architects can come into play, and to fully understand the how to lay out the spaces, right? And also how to sequence it, maybe putting it on an urban scale, like putting it near amenities like greenery and common spaces. The opportunity is there, so actually you can take it and to run with it. So basically having like different sub communities within a zone, and then maybe sub community. Yeah, so it it is a kind of like a blank canvas that we can actually start to develop. Yeah. And talking
Mhm.
about education, so I just wanted to jump a bit towards that. So how do you feel? So basically, I think you, from what I'm hearing from what you're saying, is that the education in your country is quite. I mean, it does relate to what you're doing right now, because they actually talk about these kind of concepts, like building with the community, heritage. Is there anything that you wish you could have learned in school, or is there anything that uh, that you enjoyed the most?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when once I was done with my academic, if you want, kind of tasks, and I graduated, I immediately started working. So it was a fast process, but I felt like there was a rupture between both. So I suddenly came out of the theoretical utopian world
Mm-mm.
into stepping on the real life kind of projects and being like, what? This cannot be happening. And then you start to like feel like you need to accept some mistakes and accept some imperfections for the sake of um, the real life kind of practice. There's something that I've always like pointed out, even at my years at the university. It's that in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is a difference between
Mm.
theory and practice. You know, like it's a two-sided kind of world. So, too many teachers in Lebanon, for example, don't have professional work or experience, but the theoretical kind of experience, and they get to give design studios of architecture, and they use them as tools for their own, if you want, largely isolated pursuit, with often highly idiosyncratic, if you want, kind of criteria for success. So it becomes very theoretical. It becomes harder for one to achieve these utopian ideas of the teacher without who's not taking into consideration what real life has to offer as challenges. So a lot of theory and history classes are given as well, in comparison to the practical courses that would help us on like on site later on. Um, I think the issue about this profession is that it's extremely diverse. So you have many and many kinds of practices in architecture. You could be a historian, you could be a renovation specialist, you could be an urban architect, a landscape architect. So I personally believe that this field of architecture should be divided into its so many sectors from the beginning. So if I want to be an urban architect, let me, for example, go into the urban architecture school. And this is what's not present here in Lebanon. You have the Bachelor of Architecture, Masters in Architecture, and you have some other masters in urbanism and other things, but it's still broad, you know. Like I've heard of masters of facade expertise, for example,
Mm.
outside Lebanon, or let's say something that is really related to sustainability, but we yet don't have that here in the country. It's a bit limited to like this broad world of architecture where you get to learn all of the styles, all of the theories, all of the history, and then you'd be like, okay, what am I going to do next? Like, which direction should I go to? Because it's very broad and it's very, and you begin by drawing and drawing and having tasks such as execution files, or for example a 3D rendering and all of these things. And only a few people can actually get to the phase of starting to design from scratch, like to start by sketching and then designing a house or any other type of function. And this is something I believe that should be rectified in the architectural programs, even though we lately had the accreditation from the US, the NAB accreditation in my college specifically. But I still feel like we might need a bit more practical courses, on site courses. Even internships don't really matter because there is no control over the internship. So I can go
Mm.
and just observe and be at a certain firm, but who knows what am I doing during this time, you know? Like we don't have that control over. But yeah, we do have good theory that I cannot deny. And other than that, I think a good practice on site would be really beneficial.
Yeah, we do face a lot of issues, especially with education. I mean, talking to you, talking to a lot of people before you through the podcast, I've learned a lot about the different views. But one thing in common is actually the gap, and also the
Yeah.
more practical side of things not being taught in schools. Mainly because what we said, the faculty may not have the necessary practical experience
Mhm.
working in industry, and then they just bring the theories to you during the class. And yeah, it's very understandable and it's quite common everywhere in the world actually. So
Yeah.
uh, but I think now is the time to actually evaluate, because there's a lot of it's a wider scope nowadays as compared to last time for an architect, because now let's face it, there's so many different things we can explore as an architect, like what you said, facade,
Mhm.
sustainability, technology, AI, data driven design. All these branches of architecture, as you mentioned, can also be like taught in schools, I feel. But one of the reasons why I think it's not there yet is because there's no faculty teaching that per se, because it's still a new emerging field.
Yeah.
And it's also maybe too specialized in that sense.
Yeah.
But there's pros and cons about, forcing. From what I think, the best architectural education one could get is one that you can choose, and it's also open. You can choose which branch you want to explore,
Yeah.
and not to be afraid to explore uh, whatever you want to explore. So it's open
Yeah.
ended, so that you don't limit yourself to just theory, like what you mentioned. You can also explore your own thesis. Basically, you can actually explore. Maybe you want to see how about sustainability, and you can dive deep into it. And that could be your own emerging specialization at the end of the course, right? And you should be also be free to actually, in the middle of it, you think that it's not my cup of tea, and you can actually go somewhere else. So that's the flexibility that I feel that it could be the trend in the next few years about education. especially when all of us are more open to like now we're sharing knowledge between you and I, like how different schools do their education. And because for my school we actually do like multidisciplinary as well. So at the start we do learn like a bit of engineering, like structural engineering, a bit of is uh how do I say it? Basically we touch and go. We don't really delve into it. It's more like a wider breadth of the different things we can talk about, and it's pretty fast. So it's like a touch and go thing. Uh, the good thing is that actually we exposed to different ways of designing buildings, right? Because there's different approaches and methods. The bad thing is that you don't really get to specialize in one of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that actually happens after graduation, because you realize that out of the different modules we take, I think I'm more interested, for example, myself, I'm more interested in like the data-driven side of design, or maybe like a sustainability. So all these I get to choose after I graduate, because I realized uh, having the luxury of being exposed to different a wide variety of modules across different topics, it is a good thing, especially in this age when we're trying to figure out what we do as architects, right? Because we are in a crisis. Basically, we don't know what we want to do. There's like so much to do, and
That's,
some of the architects I see in Singapore also are like trying to outsource certain things to different specialists. Like even say facade, right? Some of the projects require a facade specialist. So what the architect doesn't do that, or landscape, we don't do that. So sometimes interior design, we don't do it. So so there's a lot of different interpretations of the architect and what we do, right? So that is, I think, the number one problem we face around the world. Like what do we do exactly, right? That's the problem, and I think over we need to actually band together as like a global community to decide what architects do, and
that's true.
and that's how in turn we can actually inform the way we educate future generations. Yeah, so that is my opinion of education, because I mean, but the good thing is that now is the best time to do it, like to actually think about it and to move towards a direction together, instead of like staying in the past and like just using the way of education that's been done for the past few centuries. So
That's true.
yeah, so I think like what you mentioned, I think it's very good points. Trying the need to have multiple directions, the need to have specializations, uh, the need to have a national or like maybe global conversation about what an architect does, and how can we educate future architects. Because from
Yeah,
what I see, and also from what I understand from all the people I'm talking to in the podcast, is that there's a need for flexibility, and also like a opportunity for one to find a voice in the industry. Mm,
that's true. And I mean, it's very true that it's now much easier to like coordinate between all the students of and all the educators of architecture around the world, because everything became digital. And I think that it's a great thing to have like this uh, um, connection between all architects from around the world, maybe to kind of have this convention of what architecture should be like, just as you said. And we have the opportunity to do that because nowadays it's much easier and it's much more tangible to like explore. We can just have this one idea. I mean, some schools, some international schools are trying to do that by like having the same curriculum all around the countries that they teach in. For example, for my case, I was at an American university which teaches almost a very similar curriculum of the one present in the US. So, and I think that this should be like done by convention between many other countries, so that we have a clear, like determination of what or definition of what architecture should be like in around the world, and precise a role for architects that seem to be at a lot of times confused
mm.
between their actual like role in the society. So yeah.
Yeah, like things like what we're trying to do for like knowledge sharing, like social media, like
Yeah.
even for what I'm trying to do for ARCHLOGBOOK, right? Also to document all the things that we're doing as architects. I think that's one way to sort of gather all of the things they're doing, put it into one place, and to see do we do all of these, and like what is actually the actual job scope of an architect. There are some resources available regarding that that are available. Like for example, in Singapore, we do have a scope of work, like a guide, like so what we do exactly from the very start of concept design all the way to the end of like
Mhm.
occupation of the building. And I mean, it, for those who are listening, in terms of who, if you are a student right now who's listening, right, the best way to fully understand the scope is actually to find out, uh, maybe from the board of architects in the country, like what is the scope of architect, because they do have a document that has stated from start to finish what do we do. And I didn't know about this until very recently when I'm studying for my licensure in Singapore. And a lot of these things that I thought we are doing, like,
Mhm.
but it's not really done. But the things that I didn't know that we need to do that we are doing. Yeah, so it's uh, a lot of discovery, I feel. And because of such a wide job scope, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of considerations that we need to do. A lot of us just like maybe just don't really want to. There's not enough time to actually absorb everything. So
Yes.
that's one issue that I see as well, because there's a lot of uh, firstly knowledge gaps, right? There's a lot of gaps in the knowledge because we don't know the full scope of the work. Secondly, is also there's too little time to learn this in school, so we actually learn it outside after school. And there's
Exactly.
also this, like, sometimes your bosses don't know what you don't know, right? So you say you know something, uh but if you don't know anything, you can ask them, but sometimes they may not know as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
there's a lot of different expectations and reality, of what we do and what do we know. And I feel that the main way to do it is through knowledge sharing and technology, because I the more information that is being pumped into like our industry, like best practices, building codes, guidelines, sustainable design guidelines, uh, manufacturing, how do you call it, precast, because
Mhm.
prefabricated stuff, pre volumetric design. So all of these new technologies are coming up, and all these new approaches, even data-driven design, needs to be documented, right, and also to be shared with the world, because that's how we as a collective fraternity can actually move forward together. Because if you isolate your knowledge into one company and then they
Mhm.
keep it as an IP, right? I mean, most of the companies do it because they want to gain an edge, like have the competitive edge, to stand out and to say, I know all these approaches in design, the new frontiers in design. I know how
Yeah.
to design futuristic buildings and things that are new in that sense, and also
Mhm.
sustainable design. So, but the younger architects maybe do not know all these ideas and methods, even other countries as well. So, uh, it is a big challenge for all of us, right? And also a opportunity to step up and to say that we want to work together as a global community. And it will probably be a bottom up approach, because uh, when especially when things have happening, and the younger generations are more like, maybe for you and I, like more vocal about things, more eager to try out new ways to collaborate across the world and without any barriers. So I'm quite optimistic about the climate on social media, on the internet. All this shared knowledge is gonna be growing and growing, and also more helpful. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to a more cohesive architecture, more sustainable, more livable. Because through all of the different best practices, maybe you can document around the world, and then you can see how you can adapt to your own country and to
Yeah.
take lessons from there. So that the idea about sharing lessons, and also documenting them, and also sharing with others, So that is one of the best ways to learn. Let's say, for example, like Lebanon is trying to figure out what what is architecture, what is good architecture in Lebanon, right? So you can draw lessons from other countries as well.
Of course, that's what you're trying to like. The more we're open to other countries and other cultures, the more we can actually learn. And it's never wrong to actually learn features from each and every country. In the end, we all live together, you know, and
Yeah, we live
it's
in the
not.
same planet.
Yeah. And I think we all should have the desire to keep or to save our planet and our societies. So I hope it was as peaceful as our talk right now. It's
Mm.
a little more complicated, you know, around the world, but I also am optimistic about it because it's never wrong to get to know more and more each and every day. And I'm sure we're not the only ones who are trying. A lot of people are also trying to put effort into that thing. And I hope it works out in the end and kind of like achieve our visions towards having a better environment, better livable environment than the one we are actually having right now.
Yeah, for those who are still studying in architecture for your country, do you have any advice for them?
Definitely. First of all, I know that a lot of people of my country are trying to leave.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah, students and graduates. Myself, I chose not to because I always believe that after every crash, you can build yourself up again. And if we all leave, then who is going to take care of that country? So I ask them to be patient. I ask them to like really absorb what they are learning because it's very important. We do have strong educational systems in Lebanon. We just have to know how to use them, how to absorb what's important from each system. And I also advise them to not to be scared, to always try to explore because there's a lot of opportunities in Lebanon that one might not be able to see due to the economic crisis, due to the danger sometimes. You feel like everyone is kind of scared to step in or to like take action. But I think that we as architects can make a change, a big one. So I advise them to be as patient as they can to like achieve their visions, and they are achievable in Lebanon, actually. So yeah,
Thanks for the advice. I think the students in your country would appreciate it a lot. Yeah,
okay.
but also, yeah, I think the the idea of perseverance and being like there for your country is so important right now. I think in your country. So
Mhm.
I hope more architects in Lebanon can actually step up together and take action together and to
Mhm.
build a positive future. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hear from you all as well on the progress. Yeah, so thank
Sure.
you so much for this conversation. I think I've learned a lot as well for like understanding the situation in Lebanon and also the opportunities that you have. And I think it's very interesting. So if there's anything that we missed out, we want to talk about, to share about any issues or opportunities that you have in the practice of architecture, like right now in your country. What are the opportunities right now?
Yeah. In terms of opportunities, we do have opportunities, you know, that I feel like um, it's not like any other country, you know, you don't see the opportunity and apply for it and it's just there. You have to really work into getting your way in, especially with the political situation in the country. And I know it seems very negative, but it's not. It's something that we in Lebanon are kind of used to.
Hmm.
So what I'm trying to say is that no, we need to like unite and try to stand for what is right and create ourselves these opportunities. You know, when you really get into knowing better about other cultures and when you really try to learn from these more successful, if you want, kind of cultures and people, you would really actually try to reach to a point where your country will also get better by your hard work and effort. What's really good in Lebanon is that it's very easy to get yourself into a project, or to express your ideas, or to try to like present yourself to someone who might help you do something about the situation. This is not hard. We have a lot of places where volunteering work actually happens, which is very important because even though it's not paid, and even though it might take a lot of our time, but I think volunteering for our country, especially when we have the opportunity to volunteer and work as architects in our volunteering work, this would be important for exposure. This would be important for trying to change. I mean, if we all work together towards better urban settlement, and here I'm assigning this urban settlement to Beirut specifically after what happened. So I think that really giving in and trying to pull as much effort as we can would be really beneficial. If not today and in this second, maybe in the future. Definitely in the future, actually. And yeah, I think we do have a lot of opportunities. I mean, we have a destroyed city, and now it's the time to reconstruct all of that, to fix all of that. And I think it's the younger generation that's going to be doing so. And all the NGOs are of base young people, young students, or fresh graduates, and they are actually allowed to do whatever they are trying to do to fix all the destruction. And this is very important. And this is the time of opportunity, in my opinion. So again, I say to all the students, don't back off, and you
Mhm.
always have a spot to do something. You have a lot of damage that you can work on. So yeah,
Yeah, looking forward to more collective action and positive action, right, to
yeah.
build a city back to normalcy. So, yeah, thank you so much, Lara, for the conversation, and wish you well.
Thank you for giving me that opportunity.
All right, take care.